Survivors who pay the price for being Jewish are part of the conscience of history. All must remember how precious civilization and freedom are, and how heroic the human spirit can be. With all their might, the Nazis tried to erase an entire family of mankind. I remember all the happy times of my childhood, and this was until I was the age of 15. When in 1941, I was sent with my parents, 2 younger sisters and a brother, to the ghetto. At this time, the nightmare for my family began. In September 1943, the ghetto was liquidated, and I was brutally separated from my family and sent to a concentration camp. I was never to see my family again. The unimaginable and dreadful events, the horrors of the Nazi behavior defy belief. So some historians have written that it never happened. Therefore, I always felt compelled to speak up and tell my story for my family and all the millions of silent voices. Many years have passed since those events, but it's still very painful and difficult to talk about the memory of hell. I was born in northern Poland. Throughout its history, Vilna was ruled by the Lithuanians, Poles, Russians, and during World War I, also by the Germans. Between the 2 world wars, Vilna was under Polish domination, and this is when I was born. It's interesting, when my mother was born, it was Russia, and when my little sister was born, it was Lithuania, all in the same city. We were a middle-class family and very happy in our surroundings. From the end of the 15th century, a large and flourishing Jewish community existed in Vilna. A lively and cultural life developed in spite of Jewish discrimination in government, schools, and other places. Jews were resourceful in coping with the restrictions. Germans invaded Vilna in 1941. During the first few days of German rule, the military government recognized the authority of the Lithuanian and the coexistent Lithuanian-German co-administration, and the process of extermination had begun. There were kidnappings of Jewish males from streets and homes by groups of Lithuanian and Polish youth. The abductors would get paid 10 rubles per person. I was told later that all who disappeared were buried in a mass grave at the edge of the forest 6 miles away from Vilna. It was called Ponari. I wonder if anybody had ever heard of the name Ponari. You heard Auschwitz and all the other camps, but never Ponari. Also known as the Valley of Slaughter. Originally, it was a resort. In 1940 to 1941, the Soviet authorities excavated large pits at Ponari in which they planned to install fuel storage tanks. But they left the area before the project was completed. During the German occupation, the pits were used for the massacre of tens of thousands of Jews from Vilna and surrounding area. The mass murder of Jews at Ponari was launched in the summer of 1941 and continued until 1944. The victims were brought to Ponari on foot, by road, by rail, in groups of hundreds or even thousands. SS men and German police assisted Lithuanian collaborators, shot and killed them in the pits. Estimates of the number of persons murdered in Ponari range from 70,000 to 100,000. Most of my father's family lived in the surrounding small towns in Vilna. And we know that they were killed in Ponari. And the factual thing, what happened is that in the ghetto, while we were in the ghetto, somebody came to my father and said, do you know Bert Tabachovich, which was my name of my father's brother? And he said, yes. He said, I found some clothes in the storage. So they were killed and brought the clothes to the Vilna ghetto. For purposes of identification, I had to wear a yellow star of David and the left side of my chest and on my back. I had to go to school on the right side of the road, forbidden to use the sidewalk. I couldn't go to public parks. I was forbidden to use public transportation. Signs hung all over for non-Jews only. A night curfew was imposed. We made purchases only at certain times and at certain stores. Then in September 1941, policemen evicted us from our home. They gave us only 30 minutes to assemble in the courtyard. We were allowed to take only what we could carry. There was recently a movie called The Pianist. Did anybody see The Pianist? And when I saw this movie, I said, this is exactly what happened to my family. And they came home and they took us out and they showed it, and it was very, very difficult for me to have such a reminder. We were allowed to take only what we could carry. We marched to the ghetto. The guard was very difficult. I wore many layers of clothing and carried heavy packages. The Lithuanians rushed us along like sheep, not allowing us to rest. And this was the way to the ghetto. I always thought that the way to the ghetto was very, very long. But I discovered much later that it was very short. It was just passing by a few streets and we were in the ghetto. In the ghetto, we were isolated from the outside world. We felt that we will be poor and cramped, but we will be left in peace. At first, we were happy to be free from the constant menace of abductions and humiliations in which we were subjected for months. We felt relief and hoped. The ghetto had a police department, a theater, schools, and a library. I entered school with 3,000 others. There was a social welfare institution, a medical care system that sought to combat starvation and disease, and soup kitchens for the poor. Thanks to it, the mortality rate was low compared with other large ghettos. My immediate family had one room, and we were very happy to be together. Other extended family members joined us, but later disappeared. The Germans distributed 3,000 yellow-collared work permits, of which my uncle received one. Because his wife and children were already taken away and killed earlier, my mother, my sisters, and I assumed this family identity and name. My father's company did not issue any permits. Therefore, he and my brother would go into hiding each time a roundup would occur. The ghetto, under the direction of Jewish Council Judenrat, became productive. The Jewish Council's policy of rescue through work was based on the assumption that if the ghetto was productive, it would be economically worthwhile for the Germans to keep it going and us alive. It was only a false sense of security. While in the ghetto, we did not know about the Wannsee Conference of January 20th, 1942, that the Nazi leaders worked on details for the final solution, a plan to kill all European Jews. When the Vilna ghetto was liquidated in 1943, most of us obeyed the German order and went to the gate believing that we were being sent to a labor camp, but not to our deaths. My family and I were taken to a big square called Rosa, where I saw my father and brother being taken away. The rest of us were ordered to proceed to a place where the German Lithuanians carried out the selection. They brutally separated me from my mother and sisters and sent me to a labor camp. I was never to see my family again. And this was the most tragic moment in my life. The concentration camps and ghettos were eventually to be liquidated. Their surviving population would be sent to extermination camps, equipped with poison gas chambers and crematoria. The Germans and Lithuanians tried to hide their intentions to murder. They used terms like resettled instead of deported. They hung signs all over the gates of the camp saying, "Arbeit macht frei," work will set you free. They sent people to enter showers, which actually were gas chambers. They were given a piece of soap, and the SS officer would tell them to breathe in deeply so their lungs can stay healthy, by disinfecting them, and would keep them from getting sick. They would enter naked through one door, and within 15-20 minutes, the dead bodies would be taken out to the other door, directly to the crematoria, while the next group was lining up to repeat the process. You would probably ask me, how do I know that? Because I survived. I wasn't in this chamber. I was going to take a shower, and I was so happy to finally be online and close by to the shower room. And as I came to the door, the officer said, "Halt, stop, no more." All the people that entered there were guests. No one came out alive. This was fate. Within a short time of when the trains were unloaded at the death camps, only ashes would remain. The Nazis tried to deceive the Jews about their true purpose every step of the way. They had a thirst for perfection and a meticulous sense of detail. Nothing went to waste. They would recycle the articles of clothing, shoes, and remove gold teeth and hair before burning the bodies. Did anybody go to Auschwitz? Was in Auschwitz from this group? No. But in Auschwitz, I went with my son to Europe, and we also went to the Auschwitz camps, which I went to one only room. And I said, I cannot go to the others. But we see there the hair and the teeth and all the things that they have collected. You see this all in Auschwitz. It's preserved. And why did I go there with my son? This is something I must tell you. After, he was a freshman in college, I think, and he came home, and I was going to speak for some students, and he said, "Oh, can I come with you?" I said, "Of course." And he joined me, and he heard me speak. And when we walked out, he said, "Mother, why didn't you ever tell me all this?" He was never, I didn't volunteer with information. He knew there was a Holocaust, he knew that I'm a Holocaust survivor, but he never knew what I have experienced in detail. And then this is when we decided we'll go to Europe, and he also became very active. He took a course in college about the Holocaust to find out more. But this was really interesting that until then, but my daughter, on the contrary, she invited me to speak in junior high school where they had a history lesson. And she said, they talked about the Holocaust, and I told the teacher, my mother is a Holocaust survivor. She said, "Can we meet your mother? Please, ask her to come." And when she came and asked me, I said, I never spoke to anybody. She says, so why won't you try it? And that's what I did. And this was my first time that I spoke to students. And this was many, many years ago. Many prominent doctors, lawyers, decorated war veterans, distinguished Jewish leaders were deported to the killing centers. Also sent were people of mixed Jewish and Christian origin. I had the good fortune to be sent to a labor camp, Kaiserwald, Riga, Latvia. I was transported by railway in a boxcar, just like the one we have in our museum in St. Petersburg. I spent about 1 year there loading and unloading tin cans to be transported to ammunition factories. The camps were no place to live. They were deliberately established and designed to be places for slave work and death. Camp regulations were to make life impossible. The barracks were called blocks. 5 to 6 people slept on each bunk, head to toe to foot. The mattresses were made out of straw and bare wooden planks. Meals consisted of a small slice of stale bread and a cup of soup made from vegetables peelings with sand on the bottom. One time we had dinner with friends and they asked me, what did you eat in the concentration camps? And I told them what we ate, and soup and vegetable and fruit peelings and sand on the bottom. And they said, Mary, they gave you all the vitamins. You know, I said, maybe this helped me then. This was amazing, but if they would have known. We were awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning, rushing into the field, lined up in rows of 5, and roll call had begun. Standing in the cold, many of the starved, sick, weak inmates dropped where they stood. Some would be punished, beaten, or shot if they didn't stay straight in the line. Non-Jewish prisoners and criminals supervised the work with brutal enforcement of all work orders, and they were rewarded with better food. They were so mean, we were terrified of them. Selections for the yes vans took place at regular intervals outside in the fields. All inmates stood at attention. One time, I tried to move forward, and I thought, maybe they'll let me go into this van. They must think they're taking them to a better place. And they pushed me back. And we heard voices from the vans, laughing, crying, all kinds of voices, and all of a sudden it was silent. They guessed them in the vans. And this was fate again. They pushed me back. At the end of July 1944, I was sent to Stutthof in East Prussia by boat via the Baltic Sea. It was a transit and death camp. The smell of death was everywhere. People that could not withstand the terrible conditions died of starvation or disease. Most of my friends, the ones that went with me to school in the ghetto, they died there from the disease. I was told later on, nobody survived. 2 wheeled hand-drawn cars by inmates were transporting the dead to the crematoria. Stutthof had a guest chamber, which I told you the story, lined up to go to this. There were constant epidemics due to lack of hygiene and overcrowding. Many died of typhus. And I feared the worst. Again, I was among the very few lucky ones. After 3 months of living in hell of horrors of Stutthof, I was selected to go to Magdeburg, Germany, to work in an ammunition factory called Polte. There I worked loading and unloading ammunition shells from large ovens to cars and later to be sent to the front. The fumes were hazardous. Many men before me died of toxic gases. I was selected to work there with my girlfriend. And after one day, we walked out and we said, we cannot go back there because we will not survive. And we came to the German officer, begging him not to send us back. And he felt sorry for us. He said, okay, tomorrow I'll have 2 men. And this is part of my survival. Again, I could have stayed there another day or 2 or 3 and never survived. My girlfriend was there with me one day and she died of lung cancer right after liberation. And apparently this had something to do with it too. In the spring of 1945 was different from the 2 years I had spent in the concentration camps. Unknown to us, Hitler's Third Reich was collapsing and the German armies were facing defeat. The Allied forces are closing in Europe. Meanwhile, the Nazis made their attempt to kill all the remaining survivors in the death camps. As the Allies advanced, the soldiers forced their prisoners in death marches. I remember when we were given a bag with food unlike one we had ever seen before, and were told to line up and get ready for the march. I got on line, but never actually marched. Jewish prisoner inmates took me with them into an underground cellar bunker to wait out the raids. Nazis selected those Jewish prisoners so that they could later help them escape when the camp would be liberated. It was only the rush of events that spared my life and the lives of my 2 girlfriends. When the Americans liberated us, I felt joy, pain, and relief. My only question was who had survived for my immediate family and all my relatives. Soon after, I had to face the awful truth. I was the only survivor. It's a memory of 12 years of hell in history. The Nazis condemned to death an entire people, the Jewish people. 3 generations had disappeared in Europe. Hitler nearly succeeded in his aim of making Europe Judenrein, free of Jews. It was not only the Jews that were singled out for extinction. They also savagely murdered over 5 million Gypsies, Russians, Poles, Slavs, and others. Because a civilized nation, renowned for great scientific and cultural achievements, and because a civilized world did not stop such actions, heads of state all over the world agree that it must never be forgotten and it must never be permitted to happen again. Richard von Weizsäcker, president of West Germany, told the German parliament in 1985 that the Holocaust must never be allowed to fade from the public memory. That genocide against the Jews is without precedent in history. Anyone who closes his eyes to the past is blind to the present. Whoever refuses to remember the inhumanity is prone to new risks of infection. If there is a purpose to my survival, it is to give testimony in honor of my parents, sisters, brothers, and all the millions who were sent to their deaths. Survivors who pay the price for being Jewish are part of the conscience of history. All must remember how precious civilization and freedom are, and how heroic the human spirit can be. With their might, the Nazis tried to erase an entire family of mankind. Although I had endured the inhumanity of the concentration camps, I did not allow fear and loss to destroy my dreams. Love and hope has helped me to rebuild my lost life. The greatest victory is our children, grandchildren, and all the children that will come later. Evil did not have the last word. The lessons of the Holocaust must never be forgotten. Thank you very, very much for being so attentive. And then